It's not often that you find a piece of commercial media, in any art format, that's so commercially and critically successful, it can set the blueprint for how nearly every subsequent genre piece released in that medium played and looked for years after. Resident Evil 7 may look like a Roblox alpha build now, but at the time it was a revolutionary game and set the standard for what could now be considered survival horror. Sure, it wasn't the first survival horror game. 1989 had the game Sweet Home, which, funnily enough, Resident Evil started its development cycle as a remake of, and 1992's Alone in the Dark, which is considered the forefather to the genre, with its gameplay being the foundation for how Resident Evil, and subsequent other games in the genre, would take inspiration from. Resident Evil was a landmark game and one of the best in its niche, and its remake elevated it to arguably the best. However, after its initial release, I think there were some games that did what Resident Evil did, and did it better. Silent Hill, in my opinion, would expand upon everything that Resident Evil did and do it objectively better. Granted, that also came with advancements in graphical technology over the 3-year gap between the releases. There were plenty of other survival horror games that came out after Resident Evil that refined mechanics, told better stories, and generally played better, even within the series itself. Resident Evil 2 was overall a better, more refined, and arguably scarier version of its predecessor, but I'll tell you right now that every single survival horror game that came out from 1996 until around 2005 had, in some way, shape, or form, been directly influenced by, or shared some rogue strand of DNA with Resident Evil. I was born after Resident Evil came out, so I never really felt the full brunt of the hype, but I played the games that it obviously had an influence on, most notably Silent Hill, which, that wasn't a good idea. It's hard to look back at that golden age in survival horror and not see the influence that Resident Evil had on horror games for the rest of that decade into the early 2000s. Critics even went so far as to call these games Resident Evil clones, harkening back to the ludicrous amount of Doom clones a couple of years before. Games like Countdown Vampires, Overblood, Silent Hill, and even with Capcom's own games, like Dino Crisis. I guess if there's a formula, it's smart to stick with it. So now what if I told you that setting the blueprint for the survival horror genre happened not only once, but twice? You'd think I'm freaking crazy, right? You'd think I'm a madman, a loony, a fraud, an Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 4. It's near incalculable what a huge influence this game was on the gaming industry. This was the game that standardized precision aiming in third-person shooters. This was the game that standardized the offset camera angle in third-person shooters. This was the game that inspired companies to re-release their game on every single console generation afterwards. But in all seriousness, almost every single third-person shooter owes a life debt to Resident Evil 4. Some would argue that it's the most influential game of all time, and I'd be inclined to agree in many aspects. There are so many developers that claim they've been influenced by Resident Evil 4, and you can, to this day, feel the echoing effects of Resident Evil 4 in everything. It's like that moment when someone calls your name from afar and you get a Vietnam flashback to when your mother used to do the same thing when you were in trouble. Resident Evil 4 is Resident Evil 4 is the gaming industry's Vietnam. Wait a minute. So where do you go from here? How do you possibly top the genre-defying and defining action horror masterpiece that is Resident Evil 4? You make fucking vaguely, maybe kinda racist garbage, that's how. Resident Evil 5 was really where the series started to ditch the horror roots and go in a more action-oriented direction. For better or for worse, this is where the old Resident Evil really died. It was for worse. Tack on a co-op focus to an already startlingly fear-barren experience, and all of the tension, mystery, and soul is thrown out the window. I remember playing 5 back in maybe around 2011 and hating it. I just found it to be so boring, unwieldy, and making absolutely no sense. It's really interesting seeing a series that essentially wrote the blueprint for horror games twice see a radical departure into action blockbuster territory. There were little inklings of that direction in 4, but it still managed to envelop you in a genuinely thrilling mystery and tangibly thick atmosphere rife with terror. Resident Evil 5 was still critically acclaimed, but it left a sour taste in fans' mouth after becoming the video game sequel to Black Hawk Down with some zombies sprinkled in. Capcom seemed pleased with the results, and judging by the high sales figures and positive reviews, Resident Evil 6 came along, and that was a double down in nearly every aspect. From my understanding, Resident Evil 6 is well made and has a lot of cheesy spectacle and heart, but I can't shake the feeling that it's a giant middle finger to the fans. I'm pretty ambivalent towards 6. I've never really played it, but I've seen its fallout, and whoa mama, do people not like this game, and that's understandable. It's about the furthest possible thing away from Resident Evil, with the only similarity... similarities. It's about the furthest possible thing away from Resident Evil, with the only similarities being the name and characters. The game ended up selling close to about 5.2 million copies, but was considered a failure due to Capcom's astronomical sales expectation of 7 million in order for it to be considered a fiscal success. Coupled with a very mixed reception from critics and utter contempt from fans, the mainline series of Resident Evil games would go on ice for close to 5 years. Capcom still managed to pump out one more garbage game in the form of a multiplayer competitive shooter called Umbrella Corps, which did about as well as you can expect. I also think at this point there was a considerable shift in Capcom's ethos when it came to listening to consumers and not being a total scumpmungus when it came to making good games again. Capcom had become notorious for releasing broken games with awful microtransaction garbage. Street Fighter V. But Capcom actually started to put effort into their releases and not hang inexplicably unattainable sales figures over developers and franchise heads. 2017 and 2019 were relatively huge years for Capcom in regards to doubling down on quality and being rewarded for it. Monster Hunter World came out in December of 2017 and shipped 8 million copies, making it one of their best-selling games. Resident Evil 2 Remake came out in 2019 and sold 7.2 million copies, outselling the original by a country fucking mile, and was touted as one of the best remakes ever made, and won multiple Game of the Year awards. I can attest to that. This shit is one of the best games I've ever played. Devil May Cry 5 was the highest selling and most critically acclaimed in the franchise, with nearly everyone under the fucking sun touting it as a return to form. 4 out of the top 10 titles in the Capcom Platinum bracket, a measure for games that Capcom has made that have sold over 1 million copies, are from 2017 to 2019. It's almost as if giving a shit about your fans and making quality games yields some type of massive financial reward and good press.
Hey, wait a minute.
That finally brings us to Resident Evil 7. The progenitor of the Capcom Renaissance. I don't even know where to begin here, honestly. Like, imagine being in the E3 room when they show this trailer.
Where am I? What the hell?
Rise and shine, sleepyhead. It's time for supper.
Who are all you people?
Eat it. It's good.
Dumb son of a bitch wasn't no good if it hit him.
Lucas!
Damn, old man, not again.
Get out the way, Marguerite. Hit boy's got to eat. He got to have his supper. Come here, boy. Let's do this. Come on.
Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit! He's not eating it, Jack! He's not eating it!
Shut the hell up,
I
Marguerite!
made that for him!
Get the hell out of here!
You're a son of a bitch! Oh, I can't believe it! You son of a bitch! He's not eating it! He's not eating it!
This was supposed to be a very special feast. Come on, boy. Welcome to the family, son.
I remember seeing that and being absolutely enamored, and I hadn't played a single Resident Evil game in my entire life. It was obvious that this was going to be a back-to-basics, stylistic reinvention of the series. One that Capcom promised that both original fans and new fans would love. I mean, shit, it worked on me. The perspective had been switched to first person, there was a new cast of characters, and a completely new yet oddly familiar setting with the game taking place in the Baker Mansion. This intro section is going on for way too long, and I'm very anxious about everybody leaving to watch something else, so basically the game bangs and it's sold really well with critics praising the graphics, gameplay, and design. Okay, finally onto the game itself. Jesus, I'm sorry, okay? I figured you just wanted context. Is it me? I figured our relationship was okay, but wait, why are you packing your bag? Resident Evil 7, I feel, has one of the strongest openings of the series. Immediately, like as soon as the opening cutscene ends, there's a persistent and crushing sense of dread weighing down on you in the backwater swamps of Louisiana. This place has everything: a derelict mansion, mutilated horse sculptures, and old men walking creepily across a pathway and disappearing seemingly into thin air. All of this obviously wouldn't be possible without the help of our generous sponsor NordVPN. I'm just kidding. Too small for that. The Resident Evil engine. This game looks rip-roaring amazing. Its most notable feature is how perfectly optimized the engine is. When the demo for this game came out, I was rocking a GTX 750 Ti that was smaller than my hand. This game ran at a flawless 60 FPS on medium settings with anti-aliasing on. It has no problem at all running on my 1660 Ti Super now, but it felt super validating being able to run a big, new, expensive video game. Aside from the fantastic optimization, the lighting is great with some excellent god rays, global illumination, and texture illumination. Every environment has a nice level of depth and detail with the lighting, whether it be the shadows underneath a small table in one of the hallways of the mansion, or large shadows cast from a trailer in the middle of the mansion's backyard. I especially love one section in which you have to navigate around an area with just a candle. The only ambient light you have is the distinct hue of red and orange coming from the flame, and the shadow cast on your hand from the flame is a really nice touch. The texture work is also pretty impressive and detailed as well, at least when you're indoors. Side note, I love how you open doors in this game, and how it's like a little callback to the original Resident Evil games when you would go into first person to open doors. I just think that's a really nice touch. There's a tangible level of grime and slime over everything in the game, which accentuates just how, for lack of a better term, fucking disgusting everything is. This is genuinely one of the filthiest games I've ever played in terms of how environments look. The rot and mold, we'll get to that has festered and planted itself in the mansion is everywhere and overwhelming and provides a believable degradation of the mansion over the 5 years that it was perceived as abandoned. I'm not a fan of the blatant abuse of post-processing effects. When the game first started, everything looked blurry and blown out, and I actually had a hard time seeing things that were in front of me, and I audibly said, I don't remember this game looking like total shit. Gladly, there's an option to turn all of these off so you can see the true macabre beauty of this game. Facial animations are pretty mediocre across the board, with some noticeably bad lip syncing and unsettlingly dead eyes.
Ethan, if you find this, I know I can't expect anything from you. Not after what happened, after what I did. But I just want you to know that wasn't me. I don't know what happened.
Maybe the excellent facial animations in The Last of Us 2 has warped my perception and set a standard for me that I can't seem to divorce myself from when it comes to other video games that don't have the ludicrous budget and technology Naughty Dog has. There are some great facial animations on the Baker family and sometimes on Mia herself, but the package is pretty mixed on an overall level, and it's especially noticeable when characters come within an inch of your face to either threaten you, beat the living shit out of you, or... nah, there's no in between. And the hair effects just have a mind of their own at this point. I, for the life of me, do not understand what is happening with Mia's hair. Maybe lay off the conditioner a bit, dude. It's fucking everywhere. Other than that, without spoiling things for now, player and NPC animations are fluid and realistic. I love how NPCs convey a certain sense of desperation with their body language that I feel some horror games lack. Enemy animations are menacing and erratic and are a threatening presence just on design and movement alone, which are both sublime. Everything about the environments, animations, and lighting screams a painstaking attention to detail. This lovely detail carries over to the excellent sound design. As mentioned, this game is filthy as hell and I love it. Enemies have this slimy and liquidated feel to them as they move around. The loud thumps of their lumbering footsteps and mucilaginous bodies echoing off walls is skin-crawling. Most of the weapons have a nice kick to them as well, with the shotgun and 44 Magnum being the most notable in terms of their punchiness. The pistols sound pretty weak by comparison, but they have a decent damage output, but don't expect the sound design to convey that well. The ambience of the mansion is stellar as well, with the room tone scaring the absolute shit out of me sometimes. Depending on which area of the mansion you're in, there is a thick atmosphere that the ambience lends itself to perfectly, whether it be the industrial grinding of metal and rustic clanks of the boiler room area to the wooden creaks and whooshing breeze flowing through the barbed up windows of the main mansion. The game never felt quiet. There was always some uneasy banging or small droplets of water running down a pipe and puddling on the floor, which, to clarify, is not a criticism. It was nice having there be constant sound texture in the moments between combat sections when you're either puzzle solving or exploring. It made the mansion feel alive, like it's a character in itself. The music is also just kind of there, and I only really noticed it during big combat sections or emotional story beats. It's definitely a filler score. However, like in every other Resident Evil game, the save room theme is an absolute banger. I love the lo-fi guitar plucks and twangs and droning ethereal synths that sound like they're being played in reverse through like a gramophone or something. It definitely sounds something reminiscent of what you'd hear when traveling through a haunted swamp on the fringes of the Louisiana Bayou. I also actually really dig the voice acting. In a series notorious for some, questionable voice acting with a lot of heart and charm.
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right. Barry, thanks for saving my life.
The voice casts and performances have really improved over the years, and here's a shining example of it. Every single member of the Baker family gives an excellent performance, with Marguerite and Jack being the real stars of the show. Marguerite is unhinged and animalistic in her performance, and acts like a mother scorned one too many times, and is finally past the breaking point.
I know you and Zoe are plotting. I know you were scheming. Think I don't know what you want to do with that boy, Ethan?
Jack is a calmer yet more brutal counterpart. He's more sarcastic, even funnier in some regards, even going so far as to quote classic horror movies.
That's not groovy.
Lucas is a straight up lunatic, and his voice actor really has a lot of fun with making Lucas a total smug piece of shit, and a man who is haunted by his past inadequacies.
First step I need you to take, partner, is for you to take a peek inside the fridge in the trailer there.
Fuck you!
Oh, come on now. Don't be like that. You want to have some fun, don't you? Now, look in the fridge.
The lovely ladies who play Evelyn and Mia also give great performances, with Mia's voice actress really giving a convincing and emotionally resonant performance at times.
I remember this room. There's another door here. I'm sure of it. It's not here. It's gone. It's gone! We're gonna be a family now that you're here. There's another door here. I'm sure of it.
My only complaint is with Ethan, both as a character and with the voice performance. Imagine the whitest bread you can possibly think of and then smother that with an extra coat of paint primer. I'd like to think that Ethan is a lens for the player to graft their own personalities onto with how devoid of one Ethan is, but they attempt to give us a reason to care about him, and try to define some semblance of a personality. For someone so central to the game and the literal protagonist, there isn't a lot here to make Ethan relatable, empathetic, or memorable, like, say, Leon or Jill. From a technical and aesthetic perspective, the game is fantastic. How the game functions mechanically is a whole new can of worms. Resident Evil 7 functions quite differently from its predecessors, to say the absolute least. Although there are enough familiar elements to make it easy to adapt to the new perspective with relative ease, it seems like with every 3 mainline series iterations there's a stylistic and mechanical shift while retaining classic elements from the previous quote-unquote trilogy. Resident Evils 1 through 3 had the fixed camera angles with tank controls. Resident Evils 4 through 6 had the third-person precision aiming offset camera angle gameplay. And it's safe to assume from the trailer and gameplay details from Resident Evil 8 Village that the gameplay of this new trilogy will be first-person immersive horror, in the vein of PT, Outlast 1 and 2, and Alien Isolation. I think this works wholeheartedly for both what the game is trying to convey and as a revitalization for the horror elements of the series. It feels like a natural reinvention and progression for the series, like it was one that the series needed to make. And it works. This game is terrifying and it stays terrifying right up until the end. Resident Evil 7 plays a lot like an updated version of the old Resident Evil games. The inventory management system is back, and deciding which items to take with you and which items to leave behind is now a core part of the gameplay again. Returning from previous entries are the green herbs and gunpowder, which can be combined with a new item called Chem Fluid. Chem Fluid comes in 2 tiers, normal and advanced, which allows the player to craft more powerful ammo types and stronger medkits. Noticeable items that are missing from this iteration are blue and red herbs, which is a bit of a letdown, but I digress. As mentioned before, item management is a big focus again, and you can find backpacks throughout the Baker residence as a way to expand your inventory. Boxes also return from Resident Evils 4 through 6 and contain lower tier items like Chem Fluid, gunpowder, or herbs, and sometimes ammo. Ethan isn't an action movie hero. He's cautious and patient, and moves like an actual human being in a tense situation. He can defend himself with a variety of weapons ranging from 3 pistols, a shotgun, flamethrower, grenade launcher, and a submachine gun. A decent amount of these weapons have alternate ammo types. For instance, the pistol has regular bullets that deal a decent amount of damage depending on which enemy type you're up against, while the enhanced bullet ammo type will take down most enemies with 1 to 2 well-placed headshots. Throughout the game, you'll come across key items as well that will help you solve puzzles or grant you access to new areas that you couldn't access before. The key system from classic Resident Evil games is back with different symbols on each keys opening up certain doors in the house. Some of these doors contain entirely new areas. Some unlock shortcuts to previous ones, and some even give you access to resource rooms where you'll find much needed ammo, first aid kits, or maybe even a new weapon. Other key items include formless masses of steel that you can use for the new shadow puzzles that you'll come across in the game. There's no practical way this would ever be applied in the real world, and the controls for these sections are kind of janky, but they're a nice and fun little distraction from the grotesque body horror that awaits you around every corner. Ethan can also use the new support items that are very well hidden throughout the maps. These include lockpicks, which you can use on orange cases you'll find lying around that contain high-tier items like grenades or shotgun ammo. Psychostimulants, which are drugs that you can take that essentially highlight all of the items in an area. I don't like the inclusion of these, mostly because I feel they eliminate the exploration aspect of the game and make it too easy, but you don't have to use them, so if you're out for a more traditional experience, I wouldn't pick these up. Antique coins are another new addition that, if enough are acquired, can be used to unlock cages that can be found at a later point in the game, which contain extremely beneficial items like steroids, which increase Ethan's max health, stabilizers, which are used to increase Ethan's reload speed, and a freaking hand cannon, which Another neat little addition is the inclusion of treasure photos that can be found in hidden spots and show an image of an area, usually previously visited, that contains useful supplies like steroids or rare ammo like grenades or 44 Magnum ammo. Speaking of ammo, let's talk about the creepy crawlies you're going to be using it on and what you'll be doing in between. Resident Evil 7 bases most of its gameplay loop on the classic trilogy of Resident Evil games, so, as a point of reference, I'll be comparing Resident Evil 7 mostly to Resident Evil 1, because that's what the game bases and borrows most of its mechanics and settings from, whether it be blatantly or not. Resident Evil 1 has 3 core pillars of player engagement that make up its gameplay loop: exploration, puzzle solving, and combat. Resident Evil 7 manages to strike a pretty decent balance with the 3, but it's obvious after playing the game through that combat and exploration are given a much larger focus over puzzle solving. Exploration I felt was very rewarding. Finding antique coins, the locations in the treasure photos, and lockpicks was always nicely rewarding with some essential supplies, and I felt like I solved a little mystery amongst the plethora of bigger ones in the Baker Mansion. Each new location I discovered was a visual treat as well, with the mansion having enough distinct and downright horrifyingly disgusting places that all felt like they had their own identity and twisted slice of Americana hell. Combat takes some cues from Resident Evil 4, but translates it well enough into a first-person setting. There's about 5 enemy types in the game that range from yuck to... The main monsters you'll be mowing down are the Molded, Resident Evil 7's versions of the classic zombies from Resident Evil 1. They're slow, and you can easily run past and escape them, but they hit like a damn freight train when they do get a hold of you. They also have a nasty tendency to swarm you as well. So sometimes it's best to just run away and conserve ammo, because for the first 3/4 of this game, you'll be scrounging depending on how good of a shot you are. The Molded can be best taken down with a headshot, and whoa man, it is satisfying. There are 3 Molded types: regular virgin Molded, skinny bitch Molded, and internet porn Molded. Each of them pose a pretty large threat whenever you encounter them. I can't overstate how much of a huge risk combat is in this game. Ethan is, understandably, really frail when it comes to fighting these hulking masses of black sludge. The only means of defense that you have is running away and using the block mechanic, and we'll get into why that makes no sense later. Going back to the animation discussion, I love the way the Molded are animated. I never felt like they got a cheap shot on me, or were hard to read. Every attack they do is easily telegraphed, so you can respond accordingly, and when you do damage to them, they do this awful sprint towards you and essentially throw themselves at you to do massive damage. If they're not skulking around like their Molded girlfriend Molded broke up with them, the Molded are simps, we'll get into that later. They literally detach themselves from the walls, which in itself sounds disgusting, with what sounds like a mixture of bones snapping, flesh tearing off a sticky surface, and mucus dripping onto a floorboard. It's gnarly, dog. The internet porn Molded does significantly more damage than its virgin counterpart and moves a bit slower. The skinny bitch Molded moves and can jump at you, dealing a decent amount of damage, but they can easily be dispatched with 1 or 2 shotgun shells. For one section in the game, you'll also be fighting a lot of bugs, and I hate this part, I hate this part, I hate this part. Burn the house down, give me something to burn the house down. Oh. So you get the flamethrower during this section, and it makes quick work of all just the awful shit you'll be encountering, like flying genetically modified moths that make the worst sounds. You'll also encounter some bug nests that, unless destroyed, will send swarms of bees at you, and God, kill me now, I want to die, why does this exist? My least favorite enemy is the supply cabinets covered in spiders that also make the unholiest of noises when they attack you. I swear, editing this later is going to be a fucking assault on my everything. The only other enemy types are the boss fights, but I'll talk about those later in the video because I don't want to give you spoilies just yet, baby. We'll get there, be patient, I promise. I'll spoil the shit out of it. You won't even want to play the game. I'll spoil it so much. Do your parents love you? Puzzle solving got a minor buff again after being pretty much absent from 5 and 6. Aside from the shadow puzzles I mentioned before, there's a few smaller puzzles and one amazing puzzle that you'll have to tackle throughout the game. What I don't like is that every puzzle, with the exception of that amazing one which we'll talk about later, is too easy. None of these puzzles require an ounce of critical thinking. For instance, the shadow puzzle is just wiggle the fucking thing around until it somewhat resembles the picture on the wall it's projecting onto. There's another puzzle that's like a dumbed down version of the clock puzzle from Resident Evil 1, except the note you can find in the puzzle room essentially gives you the answer. I'm really happy that puzzles are back in a Resident Evil game, but I'm disappointed at how basic they are. Puzzles were definitely not given the same amount of attention and nuance the atmosphere, combat, and exploration were given, which is a shame because the puzzle room that shows up later is really damn good. I wish there was a consistent approach to them, as I just felt empty, like I completed a chore, instead of feeling like I was rewarded for paying attention and thinking critically. This is that point in the video where I'm spoiling everything for you, so if you want to play this, get out of here, scamp. You rapscallion, you. Get out of here. Leave the video. Come on, get out of here. Get the fuck out. Get the fuck out of here. Get the In 2014, Mia Winters goes missing while taking a high-paying babysitting job that requires her to live away from home for an indeterminate amount of time. She goes missing sometime later, and her husband, our protagonist, Ethan Winters, tries to find her to no avail. 3 years pass when Ethan, all but given up on finding Mia, gets a strange letter from her saying to come get her in the swamp-bordering town of Dulvey, Louisiana. Ethan, fully aware that this might be a ruse, goes to Louisiana and finds the location where Mia said that she was, the Baker residence, a mansion belonging to a wealthy family, the Bakers, who have been missing for 5 years. Ethan approaches the guest house and finds just a whole heap of red flags in the form of Mia's scratched up driver's license, a decrepit kitchen with a dead bird in the microwave, a strange videotape that turns out to be a snuff film, and a secret passageway leading into a strange underground lair where Mia is being held prisoner. Mia and Ethan have a terse reunion in which she keeps mentioning that a presence named Daddy is coming, and they try to make their way out of the basement, which is just strewn about with gore bags, old shoes, and missing persons posters. Mia is kidnapped again, and when Ethan finds her, she's notably different, to put it lightly. After a brutal confrontation in which Ethan loses a friggin' hand, he finally manages to put Mia down with a few well-placed shots from a pistol he finds.
Welcome to the family, son.
Ethan is then knocked out and wakes up surrounded by the secondary antagonists of the game, the Bakers, in a scene that pays a bit too much homage to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's from this point that Ethan has to avoid and kill the Bakers and work with their estranged daughter, Zoe, by phone to help develop a cure for the affliction that Zoe, Mia, and the rest of the Bakers are infected with. I mentioned this game has one of the strongest and most insane openings of the entire series, and I feel that it's executed flawlessly and sets up a great conflict. Jack chases you around for a bit, and it's best to avoid him because A, he's faster than you, and B, he can Kool-Aid Man through walls.
You're wasting your time!
So, run. After a cop comes and has like 5 seconds of screen time and gives you a knife, we have to fight Jack. And what I really like about this introductory boss fight is that you have options. You can take the gun from the cop's corpse and weaken Jack with it, yes, weaken, or you can grab the car keys from a nearby table, get in the car, and keep ramming it into Jack. Eventually, he rips the friggin' hood off of the car and drives you into a bunch of things that jet fuel can't melt before promptly dying, or so you thought, bitch!
Do I have your attention, boy? You're about to see some wonderful... Oh, fuck!
Oh, wait. I guess he is dead. It's here that the mansion starts to open up and the game, in true survival horror fashion, becomes a race to catch every MacGuffin that the plot can throw at you. Find 3 ceramic dog heads to open up the front door to the mansion courtyard. Find a lantern to open up a door that contains part of the cure. Find a dead fucking child. It gets a bit repetitive, but the journey leading up to finding these items is never boring and always delves into some pretty dark places. After finding the first 2 dog heads comes the first real boss fight against Jack, and where my problems with the boss fights come in as well. On paper, this boss fight sounds amazing. A chainsaw battle with an immortal hillbilly surrounded by hanging corpses, but the execution is what eliminates all of the spectacle from the fight. So if you kick the bodies towards Jack, he can become stunned for a second and you can get a few good hits in. The thing is, the process of kicking these bodies is tedious and you can barely summon enough kinetic force to make the body move at all. You need to be standing at a certain angle and then hope that Jack's AI isn't smart enough to move out of the way. You could also go for direct hits with the chainsaw, but it never feels like you're doing damage to Jack. Whenever you swing, you get a small blood splatter with a whole heap of sparks in your face. Did I hit him? Did I not? It isn't until like 10 minutes of waving your chainsaw around like a friggin' baboon that the game tells you that you have to thrust your chainsaw into Jack to do significant damage when he's stunned. You'd think that'd be important. You do this 3 times and then Jack explodes. Awesome. After getting that last ceramic dog head, you'll enter the main courtyard of the mansion and come across the trailer that Zoe lives in. Or lived in, rather. Here she tells you over the phone again that there's an opportunity to cure the Bakers as well as Mia by finding the ingredients to the cure around the property, starting with the arm of a D-series patient, which is in the house that Marguerite resides in, shown earlier by watching a videotape of Mia avoiding her. Here, we find the giant bugs that Marguerite calls her babies, some bad lip syncing,
Stay the fuck out!
a flamethrower, and Lucas kidnapping Mia, all before fighting and seemingly killing Marguerite. You find the location of the arm, but need Marguerite's lantern to access the room where the arm is, and this happens. Absolutely not. You then fight Marguerite in the most frustrating and bullet-spongy boss fight I've ever played, to be honest.
What the fuck? Well, that's special.
She endlessly spawns the friggin' moths at you, so you basically have to shoot her in the, Salbone Pensiero. The thing is, there's no visual feedback to her taking damage, so I kept pumping bullets into her, seemingly not doing any damage until she finally just decided to just stop and die. At least with the Jack fight, you saw parts of him off. With this fight, she kinda just yells at you until she takes a nap. It would have been nice to have some sort of visual indicator that I was making progress, because I think the game forgot that the literal first word in its genre description is survival, and that I've been running on 2 bullets this entire goddamn section. After finally killing the bug lady, you get the arm and you're introduced to the main antagonist's feet. Lucas finally comes back into the picture and tells you to find 2 key cards that lead to the building where he's holding Mia and Zoe hostage now, as well as the head of a D-series patient, the second and final part of the cure. You find the key cards and then are introduced to a super secret new enemy, the Puker Molded. They're tall, fat, and puke. Move on. After the Puker encounter, you find a videotape on a burnt corpse and you finally figure out what happened to the people in the videotape at the beginning of the game. Clancy, the cameraman, was put through a trial by Lucas in which he's locked in a puzzle room in which he has to put a lit candle on a cake in an adjacent room. Problem is, there's a sprinkler system that extinguishes the candle when you walk through it. How is Clancy filming this? This is the puzzle room that I was talking about before. Objectively, this is the best puzzle in the game, because it's the only one that forces you to think critically and really observe your environment. Okay, so I find this spyglass in the toilet, and it's all smudged up, and I can't see out of it. What can I do to wash it off? Oh shit, right, the sprinkler system. I know it's not the most complex puzzle ever made, but the game was finally rewarding me for thinking critically about my environment and how the objects interact with it. By doing so, I was rewarded with the code to get the valve to shut the sprinkler system off, and then put the candle on the cake. Satisfying ending. Except not really. So now Ethan can basically speedrun the puzzle, and you learn what Clancy did wrong so you can avoid the same fate. What bothers me is that Ethan doesn't step back when the cake explodes. Like, dude, you saw the videotape, man, come on. You put a bomb in a wall, get the D-Series head, and eventually find Mia and Zoe, then synthesize the cure. Lucas escapes in all the commotion. Except, Big Jack finds you. Now a giant grotesque mass of black sludge and orange eyes that you have to deal with. This boss fight feels the most gamey and like previous Resident Evil games. Shoot the big orange weak spots on Jack's body in order to weaken him, then shoot the really big orange spot in the middle to kill him. We've seen it before. Here is also where we see the bullshit of the blocking mechanic in all its glory. I can buy blocking hits from the molded and mitigating some of the damage they do because they're relatively the same size as Ethan, but Ethan must have been cranking his hog a bit too much since Mia went missing, because how his forearms are able to block the hits from Jack and the giant sewer waste and not instantly lose them, or at least to break them, is beyond me. Zoe tosses you a vial of the serum and you inject Jack with it, finally killing him. Problem is, you're only left with one serum that leads you to make the only choice presented to you in the entire game that basically determines the ending. Give the serum to Mia or Zoe. Now, before I go into why I don't like this, let me preface by saying that I don't mind the option of giving a player the choice. I enjoy that we get some sort of agency over the story in this moment, but I don't like how it's presented. So in order to get the good ending, you have to give Mia the serum, and giving the serum to Zoe nets you the bad ending. So naturally, upon playing the game for the first time, most of the player base is probably going to choose Mia. Like, why wouldn't you? Sure, Zoe helped you out a bit, but most of the phone conversations were terse and she just sends you from one place to another. What emotional attachment was built with Zoe aside from feeling sympathetic that her family kicked her out and she's essentially the black sheep? Zoe is a faceless voice throughout the majority of the game. Of course you're gonna choose Mia because literally the whole point of the game is finding her. I get that Zoe's pissed, but did she really expect to be picked over the dude's wife, who's been missing for like 3 years? Even Ethan acknowledges it on the boat ride when they're trying to escape.
Ethan? Thank you.
Who the hell else was I gonna choose?
Ethan.
Speaking of that boat ride that's rudely interrupted by a giant tentacle that washes Ethan and Mia on the site of a giant boat crash that's casually mentioned throughout the game as the reason this infection has spread to the Baker family, Ethan and Mia get separated and you play as Mia for a while, which I really enjoy. It's here that the story starts to unravel and the antagonist is mostly revealed and given context. I love when games actually let you play the events that are referenced throughout its story. I don't know, I just really like being an active part of the context rather than watching it or reading about it. Before she was kidnapped by the Bakers, Mia was an agent for a bioterrorist crime syndicate called The Connections. Mia was tasked with acting as the guardian for their new bioweapon, the E-Series E001, codenamed Evelyn, as they transferred her by boat to an undisclosed location. Evelyn was a genetically modified bioweapon taking the appearance of a 10-year-old child. Her gift, as she calls it, can overtake the mind of a host, essentially acting as a conduit for Evelyn to make them do whatever she wants. As Evelyn roots herself into you more, she can choose what to do with the remnants of your mind and physical appearance. She can either control your mind and make you her plaything, which explains what happened to the Bakers and Mia, or transform you into what we know as the Molded, essentially acting as a foot soldier for her. If this all sounds familiar, that's because Fear did this exact same thing 12 years earlier with Alma and the Replicas. By gaining control of her powers and assimilating more and more people, eventually Evelyn created a strong attachment to the concept of family, which she considered the Molded as. Over the course of Mia's journey with Evelyn, Evelyn thought of Mia as her mother, and by proxy, Ethan as her father.
I want to live at the lab anymore. I want a house, and I want you to be my mommy.
Okay, Evie. I'll be your mommy. Just come back with me. Right now. Okay?
Evelyn learns that she's just an experiment and doesn't want to live her life being a weapon for the forces that she can't understand, so she infects the entire ship and kills the crew, infecting Mia, and washing the ship onto the shores of Dulvey, where Jack Baker finds Evelyn and brings her back home, setting up the events of the game. Again, I love seeing this all play out and seeing these events through Mia's perspective. Evelyn corrupts the Bakers and forces them to kidnap tourists and homeless people and turn them into Molded so she can have her own little family. Evelyn hates Ethan now because Jack took her in and cared for her in a way Ethan couldn't, so Evelyn, not having the emotional depth to handle this association, taunts and tries to kill Ethan, using Mia as an extra layer of insult. I think the most fascinating thing in this game is Evelyn's perception of what family truly means. Evelyn is controlling the Baker family, so she only has the context of family through what she has witnessed. She makes Jack the controlling patriarch who's physically and verbally abusive, which, when you think about it, is kind of tragic that Evelyn's only exposure to what fatherhood is pain. Jack is jealous of Ethan because he wants to be Evelyn's father, which is something that he desperately wants after failing with his own daughter.
I was gonna be a father. Now she says he will be her father. No. I will find him, and I will make him suffer.
He sees Evelyn as a chance at redemption, and Ethan as competition and a threat. Marguerite is portrayed as the stern, subservient, and threatening mother. When avoiding her as Mia, Marguerite makes threats towards Mia saying that,
Think I don't know what you want to do with that boy, Ethan?
Evelyn's perception of motherhood is very old in worldview, like something that would be seen as traditional in the 40s or 50s. Jack's portrayal falls into this perception as well. Evelyn thinks women are there to just cook, worry about boys, and give birth to children, which Marguerite does with the moths in her boss fight. Marguerite's house is also filled to the brim with motherhood imagery in the form of baby dolls, the creepy playroom section, and the fact that you find the dead kid in her bedroom. Again, it speaks to how Evelyn perceives what these complex themes of motherhood and fatherhood are. It's not meant to be sexist, it's meant to be the manifestation of what a 10-year-old girl with no prior knowledge of these things thinks they are, which in itself is a pretty scathing satire on American family traditions and gender roles in itself. How our ancestors were conditioned to accept these baseline primal instincts of mommy cook and daddy hunt, and how damaging that narrative can be when passed along to our kids and generations afterwards. Lucas continues perpetuating that commentary as he's portrayed as the mischievous little brother with an interest in science. Lucas is actually given some really interesting backstory through environmental storytelling. It's implied that he's on the autistic spectrum and was made fun of for it, to the point where it's implied that he kidnapped one of his bullies, locked him in the attic, and he starved to death up there. From a young age, he'd been interested in science and entered many competitions, but always came in second or third. Zoe is an interesting case because she doesn't seem to be affected by any of Evelyn's influence, which makes me infer that because she was the black sheep of the family and refused to participate in the killing of innocents, Evelyn treated her as such as well, which is so sad. Zoe was so disregarded and separated from her family that not even the malevolent force possessing them wanted anything to do with her. We'll go more into Zoe during this video's sequel. Ethan is then transported to an out-of-body state which I'll call Evelyn's waiting room. Here he has a heart-to-heart with Jack about what happened to his family, and he pleads with Ethan to free his family. It's actually a pretty beautiful moment, seeing this man break down and plead with Ethan that he wasn't himself. Jack and his family were just good people trying to do the right thing, and they paid the price for it. I really like this scene, but I don't understand why Zoe's here, and where is Marguerite? Mia finds Ethan and frees him from Evelyn's mold prison thing, and I also hate this part because Mia sacrifices herself to the infection yet again to help you escape, and that whole decision with who to give the serum to was pretty friggin' pointless now, wasn't it? Ethan escapes into a salt mine where he finds a secret connections lab that contains the serum to kill Evelyn, and learns that Lucas was feeding them information about Evelyn. You also find out more about Evelyn's biology, and learn that she ages rapidly. Wait, hold on. Wasn't there an old woman with the bakers that creepily follows you around or something? Oh shit. Oh my god. Wait, Evelyn was essentially just projecting herself as a little girl from when she got off the ship until now. After Jack rescued her, she aged at like 100 times the normal rate of a human being and is now an old woman. She's been stalking you this entire time and using a mental projection of herself from 3 years ago as her baseline form. Ethan works his way through the beginning section of the game again as Evelyn taunts him with hallucinations of their fight in which Ethan lost his hand, which I love wholly for its allegorical significance alone. Ethan rejects Evelyn's offer at him being her father, so she taunts him with this fight. She plays these flashbacks as sort of an allegory to divorce. Mom and dad fighting and the child being forced to watch. This is her way of both making sense of only being able to have one parent, with the newly reinfected Mia, and the father that is abandoning her and actively trying to harm her, which he succeeds at by injecting her with the serum.
You.
Why does everyone hate me?
Goodbye, Evelyn.
Now this is my least favorite boss fight in the game, for it pretty much being a culmination of everything I didn't like about the other boss fights, on top of the fact that it's so ridiculous and tonally inconsistent from everything else in the game. Essentially, you shoot the big head a bit, and then the ending of Resident Evil 1 plays where they drop a super weapon down to you, and you use that thing to kill the big mutated thing, and my main man, Chris Redfield, shows up, and he saves Ethan, and depending on the choice you make back in the swamp, Mia's there too, I guess. And then, they fly into the sunset, and the game ends. I really enjoy the story overall. I like that it's a more grounded approach to storytelling that I felt was lost as the series got more popular and budgets got more inflated. It was definitely a sequel to the previous games, but it took place in its own self-contained world, with events separate from the other mainline games while casually referencing events that happened during those games. I enjoy the fact that Resident Evil 7 doesn't weigh itself down with the massive canon that looms over it, and that it chooses to be its own thing. It's a bold move that I feel pays off. I love the thematic resonance the story has and the satire that follows along with it. I love the characterization and lovely mix of empathy and sympathy that we feel for the villains in this game. However, there are a few problems that I do have with the story. I mentioned this before, but I dislike Ethan as a protagonist, and I found it hard to empathize or sympathize with him. I found his reactions to all the terrible shit that was going on to be weirdly apathetic and sarcastic.
What the fuck? Well, that's special.
I'd like to think the developers were going for something along the lines of there's been so much shit going on in the world involving grotesque creatures and viruses and evil corporations for so long that the general population is sort of desensitized to it at this point. But Ethan loses his shit when he sees a giant tentacle appear out of a swamp, but he's seen so much worse. Like, so much worse in the game already. I also think that this game relies a bit too much on emulating Resident Evil 1. Like, there are sections in this game that are straight up ripped from Resident Evil 1, like the shotgun puzzle for instance. It's the same thing as Resident Evil 1 without all the tension and corny one-liners. There's also the setting of the mansion with the complex key system that's a bit on the nose, but you know, we stand. I also think the ending is basically the same, what with the entering the secret lab and finding out all the fucked up shit this corporation is doing and unleashing an unstoppable killing machine that you kill with the weapon that proves the unstoppable killing machine to be stoppable. I think even the same quote is said when the helicopter pilot drops the gun to you. I just think there's a bit too much fan service in a game that so obviously presents itself as something that tries to be a bit detached from the mainline series. My last issue, and this is more of a nitpick than anything, is that I feel this game wears its influence on its sleeve a bit too much. Like, there's the obvious Texas Chainsaw Massacre homage with the infamous dinner scene in the beginning. Finding Andre in the Sewer Gators tape looks like the ending of the Blair Witch Project. Jack saying groovy when he gets the chainsaw scissors during the first boss fight with him. A shit ton of Evil Dead references. There's a lot of nods to classic horror cinema, and it can get a bit grating at times. Obviously, they're pretty tongue-in-cheek, which the tone of the game mostly skirts around, but it still feels like it's there to be like, hey player, look over here, remember this thing from this classic horror movie? That was really fun, right? I just think a bit more subtlety would have been appreciated, but again, totally a subjective thing. Resident Evil 7 was the return to form that I, and from what I gather most other fans, really needed and appreciated. I'm all for this new benevolent Capcom that really seems to be giving the fans what they want in terms of quality and not shitty sales practices. From what was shown at the PS5 event, I really think that Resident Evil 8 could shape up to be something really special, because it looks like it deviates even further from the mainline canon. I really appreciated Resident Evil 7's grounded approach to the series, progressively more ludicrous scenarios as it went on, and Resident Evil 8 seems to be continuing in that direction. I wholly recommend Resident Evil 7, and I think that newer fans will have a great time if this is their first entry. It's both easily accessible and rewarding for older fans who pay attention and stick around for a reward at the end. Next time we're going to be covering both major expansions for this game, Not a Hero and End of Zoe. That will help tie up some loose ends in the narrative and give context to others. I've also never played them before, so I'm really excited to dive in. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.